HOA tried evicting me. My uncle is a governor. I never thought my life would take such a dramatic turn. When I bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, I wanted peace, a fresh start, and a chance to finally live without the noise of the city. But what I didn't know was that the Homeowners Association, or HOA, in this community had a reputation for being one of the strictest and most unreasonable in the state. And that reputation? Well, I was about to experience it firsthand. I thought I was stepping into a dream. The house was small, cozy, and perfect for me. I could finally sit on my porch in the mornings with a cup of coffee, listening to the birds sing instead of honking horns and shouting neighbors. But that dream quickly turned into a nightmare. The HOA wasn't just strict, they were ruthless. And soon, I learned that every smile from them hit a rule, and every handshake carried a warning. At first, I ignored the whispers from my neighbors. They told me stories of fines for leaving a trash can out too long, letters for grass being a few inches too high, and even threats for painting a door the wrong shade of white. I laughed it off. I thought they were exaggerating. But deep down, I felt a little uneasy. Because when too many people tell the same story, there's always some truth hiding in it. The first letter arrived just 2 weeks after I moved in. It was neatly folded, placed in an envelope, and tucked under my front door. I thought it was a welcome note. Instead, it was a violation notice. According to them, my mailbox wasn't the approved design. I stared at that letter for minutes, confused. My mailbox was brand new, sleek, clean, not falling apart like others I had seen around the block. But apparently, it wasn't community approved. And just like that, I was given 10 days to replace it or face a $100 fine. That was my first real taste of the HOA's power. Still, I decided not to fight. I told myself it wasn't worth the trouble. I replaced the mailbox with the one they wanted, an old-fashioned, clunky style that looked like it belonged in a history museum. I shrugged it off, thinking this would be the end of it. But little did I know, this was only the beginning. The second violation came a week later. This time it was about my fence. They claimed it was an inch too high. An inch! I walked outside with a tape measure, and sure enough, my fence was exactly the same height as my neighbor's. But for some reason, they only had a problem with mine. I couldn't believe it. Was I being targeted? Was someone watching me, waiting for me to slip up? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my mind. Why me? I paid my dues. I followed the rules. I wasn't bothering anyone. Yet here I was, feeling like I was living in a prison guarded by neighbors with too much time on their hands. It didn't stop there. Soon, the letters started pouring in. My grass wasn't green enough. My trash can wasn't hidden behind the fence. My curtains were too dark and didn't match the neighborhood's aesthetic. They fined me for things that didn't even make sense. It was harassment, plain and simple. Every day, I felt my peace slipping away. The house I bought to escape chaos had now become the center of a different kind of chaos, and I felt trapped. But then came the breaking point. One morning, I opened my door and found not a letter, but a notice taped to my window. This one wasn't just a fine. It was a warning of eviction. Yes, eviction. The HOA claimed I had multiple unresolved violations and that my presence was a threat to the community's harmony. My hands shook as I read those words. Eviction? From a home I legally bought and paid for? I felt anger boiling my chest, but also fear. They couldn't really do this, could they? I sat at my kitchen table, staring at that notice. My heart raced. My breathing grew heavy. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I was just one person against a whole board of people who seemed to enjoy their power too much. I felt hopeless. And then I remembered something. Something that made my lips curl into the faintest smile through my tears. My uncle. My uncle wasn't just family. He was the governor of the state. I hadn't wanted to bring him into my problems. I wanted to handle things on my own. But this wasn't just a problem anymore. This was war. Still, I hesitated. I didn't want to seem like I was using his power for my personal battles. But at the same time, what choice did I have? The HOA was trying to strip me of my home, my sanctuary, my peace. And if they could do this to me, How many others had they bullied into silence? That thought lit a fire in me. The next day, I called my uncle. My voice trembled as I explained everything, from a mailbox offense to the ridiculous curtain rule, and finally, to the eviction threat. For a moment, there was silence on the other end. Then he spoke, his voice calm but sharp, the kind of voice that carried authority without trying. They picked the wrong person to mess with. Those words gave me strength. I knew this was about to become more than just a personal fight. It was about exposing the unfairness and corruption hiding behind the shiny letters HOA. My uncle told me not to worry. He said he would look into it personally. And when he said that, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But at the same time, I knew this wasn't going to be easy. The HOA wasn't going to back down without a fight. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every homeowner who'd been silenced, fined, or scared into submission. And I was ready to fight back. But before I tell you how the battle really began and how things escalated beyond anything I could have imagined, let me ask you something. Have you ever been bullied by someone who thought they had all the power? Have you ever felt small, cornered, and voiceless? If you have, then you know exactly how I felt in that moment. This story isn't just about me and my uncle. It's about standing up to bullies, no matter how big they are. It's about fighting for your rights, even when the odds are stacked against you. And trust me, the odds were about to get very, very real. Because the HOA didn't know who they were dealing with. And they were about to find out the hard way. The day after I spoke to my uncle, everything started to change. For the first time in weeks, I woke up without fear of finding another violation notice taped to my door. Instead, I woke up with fire inside me. I wasn't alone anymore. I had someone powerful in my corner. And not just powerful because of his title, but powerful because he actually cared about me and believed in justice. But let me tell you something. Power doesn't always scare bullies. Sometimes, it makes them push even harder. And that's exactly what the HOA tried to do. That same week, another letter came in. This one was thicker than the rest. It wasn't just a fine or a warning. It was a packet filled with legal threats, codes, and documents meant to intimidate me. They accused me of breaking community trust and hinted that they could take me to court. I could feel the rage boiling in my chest as I flipped through those pages. It was clear. They thought I would fold under the pressure. But they were wrong, because my uncle had already set things in motion. He called me again that evening. His voice carried both calmness and power, like a man who had fought battles bigger than this and won. "I've spoken to the Attorney General's office," he said. "We're going to review every action that HOA has taken, not just against you, but against everyone in your community." My jaw dropped. This wasn't just about me anymore. My uncle had just turned my personal nightmare into a full-blown investigation. And suddenly, I felt a surge of hope I hadn't felt in months. The next few days were surreal. Neighbors who had once whispered warnings about the HOA now came knocking on my door. People who had been too afraid to speak suddenly found their voices. One by one, they told me their stories. Stories of unfair fines, threats, humiliation, and silence. Stories that mirrored mine. And with every story, the fire in me grew stronger. I realized then that the HOA wasn't just picking on me. They had been running a little empire of fear for years. And nobody had dared to challenge them, until now. But of course, the HOA didn't back down quietly. No, they doubled down. They held emergency meetings, sent out community-wide emails painting me as a troublemaker, and even tried to turn some of the neighbors against me. They said I was bringing bad attention to the neighborhood, that I was selfish for dragging the governor into personal issues. And for a brief moment, I wondered if they were right. Was I making things worse for everyone? Was I putting a target on my back, and maybe even on the backs of my neighbors? But then I looked at the faces of the people who had come to me. People who had cried telling me their stories. People who had lived in silence for too long. And I knew this wasn't about me anymore. This was about all of us. The fight escalated fast. News reporters started showing up. Cameras rolled down my street. Suddenly, what began as a simple mailbox violation was being broadcast on the evening news. Headlines read, "Governor's nephew faces eviction from HOA." My quiet little neighborhood had become the center of a statewide debate. And the HOA, they hated it. They weren't used to being under the spotlight. They weren't used to people questioning their power. And as the cameras kept rolling, their cracks began to show. During one heated community meeting, one of the board members lost his temper. He shouted at a neighbor in front of everyone, calling them ungrateful for siding with me. The moment was caught on camera, and that clip went viral online. People all across the state started questioning. If this is how they act in public, what are they doing behind closed doors? The pressure kept building. Investigators uncovered that the HOA had misused funds collected from homeowners. Thousands of dollars meant for community improvements had mysteriously vanished. Fines that were supposed to be documented had no paper trail. It was corruption, plain and simple. And now, the people who once thought they were untouchable were suddenly trembling. I'll never forget the day my uncle visited me in person. He stood on my porch, looked around at the cameras, the neighbors, the chaos, and then said quietly, "They tried to scare you. They tried to break you. But look around. You've started something bigger than yourself." His words hit me deep. I realized then that this wasn't just my story anymore. It was everyone's story who had ever been pushed down by those with power. And I wasn't scared anymore. Not of fines. Not of eviction. Not of them. Finally, the hammer dropped. The state launched a formal lawsuit against the HOA. Board members were forced to resign. Some faced charges for financial misconduct. And the eviction notice they had taped to my window, torn to pieces, dismissed, voided forever. The same HOA that once tried to paint me as a villain was now exposed as the real villain. And the victory wasn't just mine. It was for every neighbor who had lived in fear. It was for every homeowner who had been silenced. It was for everyone who thought they were powerless. Standing in front of my house, surrounded by neighbors who were finally smiling instead of whispering, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Real peace. But more than that, I felt proud. Proud that I didn't back down. Proud that I stood up even when I was scared. Proud that I proved one thing. Bullies only win if you let them. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever been pushed around by someone who thought they had control over you, let my story remind you of something. You are not powerless. You are not voiceless. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to say enough to change everything. The HOA tried to evict me, but instead, they evicted themselves from power. And that, my friends, is what happens when you refuse to bow down to bullies. Backhand index pointing right. If this story hit you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Comment your thoughts. Tell me, have you ever faced an HOA or any group that tried to control your life? Your story matters. And trust me, someone out there needs to hear it.